There is a story in the Norse sagas about a king named Geirrödr. Odin heard that Geirrödr was a generous king, a good king, the kind of king that a god of war and wisdom might favor. So Odin disguised himself, called himself Grimnir, the Hooded One, and walked into Geirrödr's hall. Geirrödr did not recognize him, and on the advice of his wife, who had been warned by Frigg, Odin's own wife, Geirrödr had him seized, bound between two fires, for 8 days, without food, without water, the All-Father, king of the Norse gods, responsible for the lives of every warrior in Valhalla. The god who had hung himself from the world tree for 9 days to gain the knowledge of the runes, sitting bound between two fires in a mortal king's hall, because his own wife had arranged it. On the 8th day, Geirrödr's son Agnar brought Odin a drink of water, one act of kindness from a boy to a bound stranger. Odin revealed himself, praised Agnar, predicted Geirrödr's death, and Geirrödr died immediately, tripped on his own sword while trying to free Odin. The story ends there, with a dead king, a surviving son, and Odin walking out of the hall, having said nothing false, having admitted nothing about who he was, having arranged for a specific outcome that he had apparently wanted all along. This is not a story about a misunderstanding. This is a story about Odin doing exactly what Odin does. He lies, he manipulates, he works in the dark, he sacrifices himself, others, whatever is required, for reasons he does not fully explain. And the Norse worshipped him, not despite this, because of what it meant. Every culture's gods reflect the world that culture inhabits. The gods of agricultural civilizations in fertile river valleys tend toward order, regularity, the divine guarantee of cosmic stability. The gods of desert nomads tend toward absolute authority, clear commandments, the divine framework that provides certainty in an uncertain landscape. The gods of city-state cultures tend toward specific domains, war, love, trade, craft, reflecting the specialized social structure of urban life. The Norse did not live in a stable river valley. They did not live in a desert where the rules needed to be clear and absolute. They did not live in cities with specialized domains. They lived on the North Atlantic, where the weather did not follow rules, where the outcome of a voyage was not guaranteed by correct preparation, where the best-laid plans could be undone by a katabatic wind off a Greenland glacier that appeared in an hour and left no survivors. They lived in a world where uncertainty was not an occasional challenge. It was the fundamental condition, the permanent ground state, against which everything else had to be understood. A god who offered certainty would have been a liar. A god who promised cosmic justice would have been obviously false. A god who guaranteed the faithful their safety would have been falsified every winter. The Norse needed a god who reflected the world they actually inhabited, a world of incomplete information, of necessary deception, of doing what was required even when what was required was terrible, of sacrificing the trusted and the loyal when the larger purpose demanded it, of working in the dark because the dark was where the important things happened. Odin was not the god the Norse wanted. He was the god their world required. The sacrifice of the eye. This is the Odin myth that Carl Jung spent years analyzing, that Joseph Campbell referenced in his comparative mythology work, that scholars return to because it contains something that resists complete explanation. Odin wanted wisdom, not knowledge in the simple sense, wisdom. The specific capacity to understand what is happening, why it is happening, and what to do about it. The wisdom that comes not from accumulating information, but from understanding the patterns beneath the information. The wisdom that comes from seeing the world as it actually is rather than as you want it to be. There was a well, Mimisbrunner, the well of Mimir, at one of the roots of Yggdrasil, the world tree. A well whose waters contained knowledge, not all knowledge, a specific kind of knowledge, the knowledge of what was and what is and what will be, the cosmological knowledge, the understanding of the full pattern. Odin wanted to drink from this well. Mimir, the being who guarded the well, set a price. 1 eye. Odin paid it. He plucked out one of his own eyes and dropped it into the well. He drank. and gained the wisdom he sought. Now he sees the world with one eye. And the other eye, the eye at the bottom of the well, seeing upward through the water, sees what the surface eye cannot. The sacrifice did not give Odin more information. It gave him a different perspective, a perspective that required the loss of something he valued, a perspective that could not be gained any other way. Jung's analysis focused on this, on the specific nature of the sacrifice. You give up one way of seeing to gain another. The eye that looks outward, the eye that sees the surface of things, sacrificed for the eye that looks inward, that sees from below, that sees the pattern beneath the surface. Wisdom costs. Not the wisdom that comes from reading books or accumulating experience. The wisdom that comes from seeing through the surface of things. That costs something real, something you cannot get back, something you have to give willingly, or it does not work. Odin's deception was not incidental to his character. It was his primary instrument. The sagas document this with remarkable consistency. Odin disguises himself repeatedly, as a wandering old man, as a ferryman, as a farmer, as a smith, as a storyteller. He moves through the world anonymously, observing, testing, arranging outcomes that direct action could not produce. And the Norse had a specific theological framework for why this was necessary, not just acceptable, necessary. Odin knew Ragnarök was coming, knew it with the specific certainty that the eye in the well had given him, knew that the forces arrayed against the gods at the final battle, Fenrir, the Midgard serpent Surtur, were stronger than the gods, that the battle would be lost, that the world would end. In this context, every deception was preparation. Every manipulation was intelligence gathering. Every sacrifice of the warriors he sent to Valhalla was army building. He was not being cruel, he was being strategic. In a universe where the final battle was coming and the odds were against you, what kind of god would Odin be if he fought fair? Fair meant losing worse. Deception meant maximizing whatever advantage was achievable. The Norse understood this logic. They practiced it themselves. A Norse warrior who won a battle through superior strategy was admired. What mattered was winning, or failing with the maximum of drengskaper. And Odin modeled both. The specific names. Odin had more names than any other Norse deity. Over 150 names documented in the surviving sources. Grimnir, the Hooded One, Gangleri, the Wanderer, Bölverk, the Worker of Misfortune, Oski, the Wish-Granter, Ig, the Terrible One. Each name was a face, a role played in a specific context, a specific mask worn for a specific purpose. A god with 150 names is not a simple god. He is a god whose nature requires that many facets to fully describe, the most human of the Norse gods. Because humans are also different things in different contexts, also wear different faces, also cannot be fully understood from any single encounter. Here is what the Odin mythology tells you about the Norse that the more comfortable parts of the tradition skip over. Odin sacrificed his favorites, not his enemies, his favorites. The warriors he most valued, the humans he most favored, the people who trusted him most completely. He arranged their deaths, so they would be in Valhalla, waiting for him, for Ragnarök. The sagas document this. King Ermenrik, King Hjalmgunnar, multiple specific figures who were favored by Odin, who received his direct assistance, who achieved great things with his support, and who were then abandoned or actively arranged to die by Odin, because he needed them in Valhalla more than he needed them alive. The Valkyries, the figures who chose the battle dead, who decided which warriors went to Valhalla and which to other fates, were not neutral observers. They were Odin's agents, making specific choices, serving his specific strategic purposes. The Norse warrior who prayed to Odin for victory, who fought bravely, who achieved something great, who was then killed, was not abandoned by his god. He was chosen, specifically, for a specific purpose that he was not told about. This is not a comfortable theology. It asks the worshipper to trust a God who has openly documented his willingness to deceive and sacrifice, the very people who trust him most. And the Norse, who had lived their entire lives in a world that demanded exactly this kind of trust, who knew that the ocean did not spare good sailors, that the winter did not protect good farmers, that the best preparation was not a guarantee, found this theology not alienating but familiar, accurate. A God who told the truth about how the world worked, even when the truth about how the world worked was that the world would sometimes sacrifice you for reasons you would not be told. In 1936, Carl Jung published an essay. It was called Wotan. Wotan is the German name for Odin. Jung was writing in response to what he was observing in Germany, the specific cultural and psychological forces that were producing National Socialism, the specific way the German psyche was being possessed by an archetype, the Wotan archetype, the god of storm and frenzy and inspiration and war, the wanderer who appears in disguise, who disrupts stable order, who sacrifices, who lies, who serves something larger than any individual. Jung was not endorsing what was happening in Germany. He was analyzing it. This is what happens when an archetype this powerful is activated in a collective psyche. This is what Wotan, Odin, does when he moves through a culture. He disrupts, he inspires, he lies, he sacrifices. He pursues his purpose with absolute commitment, regardless of the cost to the individuals caught in his path. Jung's analysis was not about Norse mythology. It was about the specific psychological content that Norse mythology encoded. The archetypal forces that the Norse had been living with for 300 years. That had shaped their culture, that had produced their relationship with uncertainty, deception, sacrifice, and the acceptance of outcomes that individual will could not control. The Norse relationship with Odin was not superstition. It was a psychological technology, a framework for living in a world where the forces that determined outcomes were larger than any individual, where the God you trusted would sacrifice you if your death served his purposes, where wisdom cost something real, where the most powerful being in the universe was also a liar and a manipulator, and where all of this was not a reason to despair, but a reason to be strategic, to be prepared, to build your army, to gather your warriors, to do what Odin did. Work in the dark, with whatever you have, toward whatever end is worth reaching, even if you know, as Odin knew, that the final battle comes, and it does not end the way you want. The one eye in the well is still down there, looking up, seeing the world from below, from the depth where the patterns are visible, where the surface dissolves and the structure underneath it becomes clear. Odin paid for that perspective with something he could not get back. The Norse who worshipped him understood the price, because they had paid versions of it themselves, on every crossing, in every winter, in every moment where the world required something from them that they would not have chosen to give. The eye in the well keeps watching. Still, after 1,000 years, from the depth where the comfortable explanations do not reach, where the world looks like what it actually is, and the wisdom that costs everything, is the only wisdom worth having.